When I think of survivors and survivorship, we are so many things at one time, right? We are creative, we are anxious, we're confident, we're awkward, we're talented, we're untalented, we're selfish. Like, we have all these things and that are wonderful, complicated.
One man's become a floral designer, one man's doing photography, one man does painting, another man's a woodworker, a couple have become storytellers. Those are all creative expressions for men to find their voice, to be empowered, and to use those tools as a mechanism for healing.
Welcome to Just Healing, where we rediscover humanity in our conversations around trauma and celebrate all the unique ways we love and heal.
Hey everyone, I am Michael Munson. This is the next episode of Just Healing, a podcast of MenHealing. Welcome. We are really excited today to have two really fun, fantastic folks. Some of you know who Jim Struve is, and some of you are going to know who Tyler Martin is by the time we're done. So we're going to have a really good conversation, and we're going to kind of talk about this upcoming event and the play Bonded. So I'm wondering, Jim and Tyler, if you could do a quick 1-minute introduction of like, hi, what's your name? What's your pronoun? 1 or 2 sentences that kind of tell people who you are.
Well, I'm Jim Struve, he, him, his. I'm the executive director of MenHealing, and I'm a survivor myself and have been doing this work for about 50 years.
Hey everyone, I am Tyler Martin. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm an actor, writer, director, filmmaker based in New York City. And across all the mediums I work in, I am passionate about telling stories that are authentic and relatable, subversive, stories that explore humanity at the end of the day. And I'm the playwright of Bonded, which is the play that will be read at the MenHealing event this April by myself opposite the immensely wonderful and talented BELLAMY Young.
I love that word subversive, which, it's like every time somebody says subversive, I'm like, I want to know more about that. So can you tell me more? Tell us a little more about Bonded, but subversive as well in the Bonded.
Yeah. Well, specifically within the world of Bonded, something that I'm sure we'll get into, is that I really wanted to tackle the world of trauma and survivorship in a way that I felt like was authentic and different than what I typically see in media. And in writing Bonded, I kind of found that almost the most subversive way of doing that is just being authentic. It's oddly this kind of subversive tone to it that, because we don't see it, kind of stripping away all the romanticism, all the over dramatization of survivorship, it somehow feels fresh and thrilling and exciting in a way that we don't typically see. And that alone feels very subversive to me, specifically with this piece.
So that was a good teaser too, because he didn't really say what it was about, which is kind of cool. It's going to make people want to come and be part of it, which is really fantastic. So some of us have seen the play when it was in New York City for the MenHealing Bonded screen reading a couple of years ago. People are going to have another chance this April, like we've all said now. So I'm wondering if both of you could share a little bit about like, how did that initial kind of interaction happen? How did you all meet each other? Why do you want to do this again? Other than because it's cool and it's fantastic. But tell us about the beginnings.
Well, I can start. We were contacted out of the blue by Tyler back in, I guess it was 2021 at some point. We were still juggling all the bells and whistles of COVID and being online and virtual. And one of the things about MenHealing is when a number of years ago, we shifted our focus to want to become more about storytelling and more about helping men who have traditionally been very invisible and very isolated tell the stories. So we could put faces and stories to the representation. So when Tyler approached us saying he's a playwright, he's got a new play in the works, and said, well, send me the script. This sounds like an interesting avenue to go down. And three of us vetted the script separately. We all had the same reaction, said, this is incredible. This would be a fabulous way to reach people. And so we pretty quickly connected with Tyler and started working on what can we do to continue our work and bring this to people's attention through storytelling. And so short version is Tyler made arrangements with a theater in New York City off Broadway to do the stage reading event. And we hooked up with live streaming. We went to New York City, we did it, filled the theater, got a good turnout live stream, and had a really positive impact. And what's so wonderful is the script may sound kind of melodramatic when you just hear it talked about, but it's actually very engaging, very personal in such a way that when we did the stage reading in October 2022, the audience was just stunned and sat in silence at the end of it before we were starting our audience talk back. And then they were very engaged to do it. So we've been communicating since. Now Tyler pick it up here. He's got plans for some future showings off Broadway with this play. We were planning a fundraising event at the end of April, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we wanted to focus on creative expression as a form of healing. So this is a match made perfectly. And so here we are planning the event with stage reading as the core, surrounded by about the stories of 10 or 11 other men who are using other mediums for creative expression.
The play, to what Jim was saying, really covers like an array of topics and themes, from abuse, trauma, family dysfunction. There's misogyny, toxic masculinity, abortion, suicide, religious prejudice. Like, the list goes on and on and on and on. But something that I love about the play, and what I was really passionate about in the writing process of it, was really looking at the tragically beautiful concept of trauma bonding. And I let that kind of lead my writing process. And what came from that was that I let these people just be people, and letting them, kind of what I was saying earlier, letting them feel real. It also led them to be very funny. So the play is actually very funny, I think, and the audience thought. And that's been something really cool about this piece, is that people are able to see themselves in so many different aspects of it, because it relies so much on just an emotional journey versus relying on a specific event or specific circumstances necessarily. They're there, but they basically affect what the person is going through, but it's not about those events. And so when I was getting ready to think, like, okay, what do I want to do with this reading? I really wanted to center it in community. That was a big part of it to me. I'm a survivor myself, and I reached out to other survivors. I got them to read it at different stages throughout, just to get opinions, especially with some professionals that work in child sexual abuse and trauma, and then also in women's health. And so really pulling the community together, I was just doing some research, found MenHealing kind of randomly, reached out. They were like, oh, we've been wanting to do creative work. I was like, wow, what are the chances? And so, yeah, I produced the stage reading in New York in partnership with them. We raised nearly $20,000 for them with that reading. And the money was amazing, obviously, but the outreach and the level at which the play touched people was really something special. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, what mattered most to the people involved. This play, when seen, heard, read, has had one consistent thing, and that is evoking very strong emotions. And that was apparent then. And I think it really solidified to me and the MenHealing team that we had to continue this partnership.
As we're preparing for today, Jim, I know that you made some comment about how MenHealing is starting to get more involved with creative aspects and healing. And what's funny to me is that, like, weekends of recovery have always involved creative, artistic pieces. So before we move on to some of the other questions, I'm curious how MenHealing is encouraging or evolving more around creative concepts.
Well, twofold. Yes, you're right, Michael. We've always involved creativity in our weekends of recovery. People come to the 3-day weekends of recovery event, and they're surprised by the fact that during the weekend we engage them in creative expression. It's not just a teaching kind of weekend. It's not a headspace kind of weekend. And by Saturday evening of the weekend, people are talking about having joy and learning how to play together and be creative. So we're doing that. We integrate modalities that are creative into the weekend as much as we can. An example being our process for Bridges to Home, which is our goodbye session. We now do something as simple as we have a packet of materials that each small group who's been together for the weekend gets the same package of materials, and they build a bridge from the weekend to where they're going next. And so we have however many small groups we have using the same materials, showing 3 different ways or however many different ways to express themselves. So we're setting the stage, and we're finding the number of men who've been through the weekend who then get back in touch with us about how their creative self has been liberated. That's what we're going to be featuring with the 10 or 11 men who are surrounding this weekend. One man's become a floral designer. One man's doing photography. One man does painting. Another man's a woodworker. A couple have become storytellers. Those are all creative expressions for men to find their voice, to be empowered, and to use those tools as a mechanism for healing. And then just parallel to that, we have gotten much more involved with producing videos and audio materials that makes men as survivors more visible, have their voices. Anybody listening to this podcast, check our YouTube channel. We now have 160 video or audio productions that we've done just in the last 6 years that are posted there. So for engagement, we invite our audience to find men who can be creatively expressive.
Fantastic. And I know that sometimes when we think about men who are survivors or women who are survivors or trans folks who are survivors, we sometimes don't think like that men are something other than linear. So it's fantastic when there's left brain, right brain, all of the things that make up who we are, doing that creative expression and healing in lots of different ways. So yeah, thank you for that. And it's like, I'm glad this is a conversation here and that people are getting to see more and more of men being creative, men doing things in that non-linear way. So
part of what's so wonderful about Bonded is it's teaching people about sexual harm, not through statistics, not through PowerPoints, not through bullet points, etc., but because of the relationship between the two people who are presented in play, and we get inside of the relationship of their life. And I think everybody will probably see some piece of their own experience about how sexual harm has interrupted relationships and the potentials for people to work through their harm and find very unexpected ways where they might be related.
What you just said, Jim, is interesting because Tyler, you said the play is really about relationships and it's not about kind of like survivor focused in terms of like, let's just look at the survivor. Let's look at the social issue. So I think it's really interesting how there's very similar approach to looking at healing and survivorship. Did you want to add anything to that, Tyler, about like how your play is created in a way that's about those relationships, not about the issues?
Yeah, sure. I am just not typically a person to write preachy material. It's not my style necessarily. And I think my viewpoints are very or extremely clear within the writing of Bonded. However, yeah, it's just not a play about the system. I would even argue it's not really a play about trauma, actually. It is what I was saying earlier. It's just about these two people who have been extremely affected by these things, but it is not about those things. And I think what that does is it allows people to connect on an emotional level to these topics without hesitation or without fear of the topics themselves. It doesn't feel like they're being taught at, because if I just write a play that says we need criminal justice reform for 2 hours straight, that is, I'm sure some people will be like, yes, I agree, and nod their heads. But is that really going to move people? Probably not. Is it going to make people super duper passionate? I don't know. I think this past year politically has proven that point over and over and over again, that people have to decide for themselves what they believe in. They cannot be told what to do, and they need to feel as though the decision or the outcome is personal to them on a personal level. And I think with a show like Bonded, the audience is given an opportunity to invest in character, to invest in what feels like real people, to relate to these topics in ways that might be shocking. That's been a constant thread in hearing from people of, I didn't realize I was even connected to the subject matter, but as I was thinking about it, because I connected so intensely to the emotion that you were conveying, it like aha moment happened. And that to me is where activism starts and where it really begins. That's where we actually begin conversation. And that's what I aim to do with this piece for sure.
As I'm listening, I'm thinking about like, well, how does system change happen? And it can happen in a lot of different ways. And so both of you are talking about kind of how systems change without necessarily kind of going straight at it. I want to back us up just a tiny bit because I know, Jim, you and MenHealing have been doing a lot of work in the criminal justice system or around the criminal justice system. And there's a little bit more of a direct way in the work that you've been doing, but it's also really creative because it brings in things like videos. So I'm going to stop making projected comments, but do you want to share a little bit about what MenHealing is doing around folks in the criminal justice system and how people are getting access to healing materials if they're incarcerated?
Thanks, Michael. One of the things about MenHealing is that we try to be responsive to things that land in our lap and things that come to our way in unexpected ways. And what's kind of ironic about this whole process is that we were not planning to get involved with plays or with script reading. And Tyler just approached us and we said, well, we're doing storytelling. This sounds like a great idea. At the same time, the themes of the play were not playing out in real time in politics. That was not how Tyler wrote it. And as soon as we got in and we began the process to prepare for the October 2022 event, and now this one, many of the issues in this play, in the script, are up and running live time. And so all of a sudden we're immersed in present tense, not in a preachy way, but in an engaged way. And then third, simultaneously, one of the alumni men who attended a weekend, about the same time as Tyler was approaching us, he said, have you ever thought about the fact that going to your weekends requires you to be have mobility and coming? And what about men behind bars? Okay, bingo. The play that Bonded surrounds starts with a man in jail who is having problems with the criminal legal system and is kind of stuck in that, but is not disclosed that he's a survivor. So part of the process, which was what we were discovering, men who are behind bars, an incredible number of them are survivors. And many of them have gotten in trouble with the law before they could seek mental health services. So here we are, Bonded's going down the track, and we began to develop materials, and we started uploading them on tablets, which we're now kind of evolving after COVID into prisons, correctional facilities. And fast forward, just this past January of 2025, we have now uploaded our curriculum materials to 1,200 correctional facilities nationwide, reaching over 1 million survivors behind bars. And we are now tracking data on survivor use, and our expectation is a lot of men may find these materials and finally have the courage and the support to say, I'm a survivor too, or these materials will be helping them behind bars. So here we are immersed in this play that has this theme of impact of criminal legal justice. At the same time, we're rolling out materials to prisons. And then we're realizing that our materials have application beyond prison walls. And so we're going to be translating this whole set of materials into print and electronic version for sale which anybody who wants can check our website and find out how to purchase them. We have a 160-page, very user-friendly, very creatively, artistically drawn book about sexual trauma and about healing. And it includes lots and lots of videos that are doing somatic healing, men telling their stories. So we're kind of on this track where this was not part of our 5-year plan. This just kind of all happened through the relationships, Tyler approaching us, our alumnus approaching us, and us saying, okay, let's go for it. And now we're rolling out these amazing activities.
It's amazing too, because I mean, like, I've been around for 5 years or more, and it's like, yeah, this was not part of the plan, but like, how freaking cool is it that it's now part of the plan? So yay. And just amazing, like how many people are getting access to materials that they would have never gotten access to, probably if they weren't incarcerated, they weren't getting some of the stuff that's coming in for them. So like, that's just fabulous. It's really, really cool. I want to shift us a little bit. Tyler, you mentioned before words like trauma bonding and over romanticizing. When I think of those words, I think about the perfect survivor syndrome, or the things that are like, survivors are only supposed to present in nice, neat ways. They're not supposed to use alcohol. They're not supposed to use drugs. They're not supposed to have sex in risky ways, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. They're not supposed to end up in jail. All of those things. And in this play, there's realness. There's really good realness. And I think that's probably why people can really relate to it. I'm curious if you were intentional when you were writing, and I know you kind of tapped into that a little bit, but were you intentional about not romanticizing, not creating the perfect survivor, or did that just evolve as you were creating?
I was pretty intentional from the get-go. I knew if I was going to tackle the subject matter, I had to do it in a way that, I'll use the word again, felt subversive and was a multitude of things. When I think of survivors and survivorship, we are so many things at one time, right? We are creative, we are anxious, we're confident, we're awkward, we're talented, we're untalented, we're selfish. Like, you know, we have all these things, and that are wonderful, complicated. And I think sometimes in storytelling, we forget the survivors are human. And so when writing this, I wanted to see flawed people. You know, I think in all my writing, I aim to write things that I personally relate to. I will never relate to a perfect person. And so how are ways that I can create these two people that I see myself in the good and the bad, the pretty and the ugly? And I think showing that nuance is scary, honestly. It's terrifying. But on the flip side, it's liberating. And to honor both and the in-between of our full selves, and to do that in a creative space, I think, you know, I often say that the act of creating for me is something spiritual. And I think that's a big part of it, is honoring all aspects of self. And so when creating these two people, that is what I aim to do. And to go off of what Jim said earlier, actually, it's so funny. Like, when I wrote this, Roe v. Wade hadn't happened yet. That had not been overturned. Trump, second term. And so, you know, women's health and women's rights, what's happening with the queer community at large right now. We also see two really interesting opposite people. We have someone from cosmopolitan New York, very blue bubble, and then we also see someone from Texas, from what we can assume from his story, a very red bubble. I would assume he probably voted for Trump, and I would assume she voted for Harris, you know? So we have these two really interesting sides of the coin forced to be in one room and talk. And if I were to have approached that, even without knowing what the future was, even if I were to approach that and try to make them each perfect, I would have been bored writing it. So, yeah.
One thing about the script that's kind of I guess just a teaser for the listeners of the podcast here, not to give it away, but the humanness of the characters, which is the core of the play. It's not a 5 steps to healing or a 10 bullet points to sexual trauma, but the simplicity of the characters and engagement. Because in a way, Tyler's character is a jerk, and you kind of want to be angry at him and pissed off at him, and you grow to really get fondness towards him. And his sister, who was like the ally in the survivorship court, she's stranded. You can't help her. And she's like trying so hard and you can't tell her what to do. And then the two of them get so entangled in stuff. And you sit there saying that there's no solution to this at all. This is like a stranglehold. They're doing, and yet they keep winding their way through, connecting, disconnecting, disrupting, bonding, tearing each other apart. And by the end of the play, you're sitting there saying, oh my God, my head's spinning. I don't know the answer to this. What would I do in this situation? How would I resolve this kind of stuff? And there are so many things that pulls them together and so many things that pulls them apart. And then you realize that's the story of survivorship and the people that get engaged within their relationship, whether it's family or friends, it's pulling and pushing, pulling and pushing. Kind of the simple core part of what comes out of the play.
I think the key to that is we have to move forward in our lives. We actually don't have the option to just stay in one place. We can try, and I think that's when a lot of people experience intense depression, anxiety, etc. But we have to move forward. And so you see these two people in real time moving forward, and it's not pretty. It's not enjoyable to move forward all the time, but they do it, and you see ups and you see downs, and you get to see this rhythm that feels disjointed. You're like, oh, thank God they're finally on a rhythm. And then someone says something and they're like, off again, and you're like, fuck, why did they say that? And that's life. That's real life. That's what we do as humans. And so I think the key to it is that they keep going forward, though. They're both very forward people. And that's something I do very much appreciate about each of them.
Let's move on to a slightly different subject, but it's all the same subject because it's all the same thing. When either of you, Tyler, let's start with you. You obviously mentioned in the beginning, I mean, you clearly are a writer, you're an actor, you do other things that are creative. I just am guessing. I'm guessing that. And I'm wondering how writing or whatever creative mode you want to talk about has been healing for you, either about sexual harm or about any other kind of healing.
Honestly, it's kind of something I just mentioned, is that self-expression of my full self. So I'll just repeat I come from a family of ministers. Let me just say that. I come from family of ministers, and I'm from Texas, and the group of ministers that were my family are my family, although a lot of them are not ministers anymore. Extremely conservative. Women can't talk behind the pulpit, kind of thing. They can't even give morning announcements. Like, that's the level of how conservative. So being a queer kid in that world was not necessarily ideal in any way. However, I always felt very connected to ministry. I think a lot of queer people can relate to that. The urge to feel connected to something greater than we are, the aspect of community that is so beautiful about religion. I'd say, I have a lot of qualms with religion, but one of the things I love about it is community, is ritual, is all those things. But then somewhere as a child, it kind of clicked with me, and I think it's because I have ministers in my family. I got to see this duality happen in real time, where the ministers would be seen as ministers to the congregation, and people really looked up to them in rather intense ways, idolized them, definitely. But then I got to see them at home when their shoes were off, they were watching some trashy reality TV show, And it was this like really different viewpoint that I was getting than the congregation. And essentially, to me, how I interpret that is performance. What is a sermon? It's a script. It is a monologue that they have written that has to have a beginning, middle, and end, that has to evoke emotion, that has to get the audience invested enough to actually put money into a tray passed around. That's a high level of investment. And so to me, I got like a crash course in creative writing from childhood. So I now I see that in that light. At the time I didn't, and I was resentful about that world. But now I see that as such a lovely gift. And I do kind of see my work as, I was the first, actually, I'm one of 6. I was the first child and number 5 not to get into ministry or marry a minister. But I kind of look at what I do now and I'm like, well, damn it, maybe I did kind of get into ministry in my own kind of way. And so I think it did pull me in, and I think that's what this is. And I think when I am able to tap into, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about like the word calling or like natural gift kind of stuff. I don't really like any of those terms, but when I do this work, I do feel like it comes naturally to me, and I do have a track record that has shown that I am able to connect with people in a rather deep way, and through my art specifically. And why would I ever stop that? Because the more I do that, the more I'm affected. Then the more I write, then the more other people are affected. And so the chain keeps going and going and going and going and going. So the more I feel like I put out, the more I feel like I get. So is it selfish? Of course. But I think that's where most good things come out of, is what feels good, what makes others feel good. We should do more of, especially right now in the world. Gosh, we should definitely do more of that in the world right now. So yeah.
Jim, did you want to add before I kind of poke in the other direction?
Well, as Tyler was talking, my mind was kind of going, I hadn't thought about this for a long, long time. But I remember when I was probably in 4th, 5th, or 6th grade, my abuse, some of it was still going on at that time. But I actually started writing and getting my classmates to produce several plays about stuff. And I had forgotten that I was already kind of in that of using play as a modality to engage people while I was trying to find ways to peek my story out with what was going on. And then I've always been drawn to theater my whole life. I've always been drawn to metaphoric expression, trying to find ways to find imagery. I know MenHealing, one of our metaphors, our images right now is the ripple effect, seeing the pebble that drops in the water and what it sets in motion from there. So I think, I just love this kind of modality more so than academic teaching or academic research kind of stuff. So I kind of feel like my life is that ripple effect. When I was in my 20s and beginning to remember my abuse and wanted to get help, I couldn't find anybody to help me at the time. So I said, I'm going to make sure that for the rest of my life, I'm creating opportunities for other men not to be stuck here. And now I've devoted 50 years of my life to organizing and creating resources for men who are survivors. That is my creative expression, is to create as many mechanisms and find as many different avenues, pathways, stories, pictures, workshops, podcasts, whatever, find all the different ways to reach people, and all through engagement, not through just sitting and feeding our head.
That's perfect, Jim. Because you just brought up, it's like, there's not like, this is art or this is creativity. It's like, everything is creativity. Everything. Unless if you're, I don't know, I think everything is, even if you're just sitting there, of course it is. For people that consume art, and again, it goes the same way, right? Like, we don't have to be going to the opera or the theater or an art gallery. Everything is art. How are people that are experiencing art in the world, how do you think that is healing for them? Whether they're intentionally going to look for art or if the art is just all around them?
Well, I think so many of the artistic, creative modes, you absorb them. And it's almost like a visceral body kind of experience. That's what happens, for example, with this play. You're sitting there and you're listening, but you're absorbing it and you're taking the feelings away. And you then have to, when someone says, what did you get out of it? You have to process and have it come back out to say, I don't know what I got, but here's my digested version of what I did. So I think when people see paintings, when they listen to music, when they see a play, when you see all those kind of modalities, their absorption, and it's healing. It's kind of learning by doing, learning by being, learning by immersed. So that's why I think all these modalities are so good, because how many times does everybody listening to this, you read something and then someone says, what's your takeaway? And you can't remember what you took away. But you talk to someone who's experienced something like a play or a music, say, would you take away? And you can describe it with a lot of retained value over long periods of time. That's why we even use it therapeutically, that things that viscerally connected to you when you were many, many years former, you put the song on, you put the play on it, and you remember immediately where you were, what you feel. That's the whole value of the creative expressions, is it brings it out without censorship.
Yeah, I love that. And sometimes, like you just said, Jim, like, how we can, you're asked to reflect on something and, that we can share something that we may not be expecting to share because of how we felt. And, I keep on thinking about, like, healing for a lot of folks is not about articulating it. So people might have a feeling state and they may never be able to articulate that in words, but it's still really amazingly healing. Tyler, I'm wondering if I could ask you the same question about, like, what do you think art does for other people and their healing?
Well, going off of what you just said, I think is something really important, is that what speaks to one person is not necessarily going to speak to someone else. I always say stand-up comedians are the most trauma-ridden people out there. And I used to do stand-up, so I can verify. But there's a reason for that. And there's a reason that they choose to express and share trauma in that way. That doesn't necessarily feel like they are expressing trauma, but they are. And I think when we break it down, we can see that. And so, like, whatever the avenue is for you, let that be your avenue. But also, I would say that I always try to push myself into things that I don't necessarily consume. I think that's how we broaden our worlds, and I think that's how we make our lives more fulfilled. And so I never say I don't like an art form. I might not understand or necessarily relate to an art form right here in this moment, but will there be a painting, for example, somewhere down the line that brings me to tears? I hope so. Like, gosh, how amazing would that be? So I would say be open to everything. And the most meaningful stuff to me, so that's the only way I can really answer this, is like what I find healing is when I leave something and I have questions and I want to talk. And that can be a comedy, that can be a drama, that can be a thriller, a horror film, like anything. And so, and that was, we had a Q&A after Bonded in New York. We'll have a Q&A after the reading in April. And we could have all sat there for hours and talked there. And we did, actually, because after the Q&A, there was a line of people just waiting to chat. And then we talked for hours afterwards. So, and people couldn't wait to ask questions, to share stories. And it was this beautiful communal experience in that way. And so I think if we are able to come away with something with questions and maybe even things to push back on, I'm all about playing devil's advocate. So please push back in some way. Then, like, I think that's a healing journey right there for sure.
And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was about laughter and joy, and it really relates to what you just said, which is like, like at the talk back, at the last reading, it's like, yeah, there was a lot of engagement. Lots of people talked. Lots of people were like really excited. People had questions. People had introspection, but there was also a lot of laughter that happened. So this is the power round question of like, how do you think joy and laughter is part of art and healing and the whole shebang?
I think the way I would simply say joy is like having the furnace or the boiler in the basement. It's like the core that everything else can emanate from. And when we get to the point where we lose our joy, we don't have any energy. We don't have any core to go from. So I think it's really essential that even in hard times, if you're a trauma survivor, if the politics are not to your liking, if the world is really a tough place, we've got to find a source of joy that allows us to emanate. And we can't ever give up joy. That's why the difficulties now when we're dealing with so many crises in our political and real life is how do we hang on to something that's joyful so we don't abandon that and just become worker bees that are fighting back and doing things. We've got to let the joy emanate, because that's the creativity that comes from joy is we may think of solutions or avenues that we wouldn't have thought of if we didn't have that joyful perspective. I'm a big believer in joy.
Me too. I actually have so many thoughts, so I'm going to really try to condense all my feelings about this. I will say that I am very much of the school of thought that all emotions are welcome at the table, and none are necessarily better than the others. And the more that we can embrace our full self, I think the more that we can have that forward momentum that I was discussing earlier. And so part of that is joy, though. And so how do we find that? I think it's just embracing the everything and all that we are, and realizing that we actually don't have to fight against being scared. We don't have to fight against sadness. We don't have to fight against all these other emotions. And actually, when we wrap them up and hug them and say like, hey, I love you too. Like, you're a part of me and I love you. Then like we can find a joy that is even more joyous than maybe we thought was available to us. And gosh, I had so many other things and I forgot all of them, but that was the main thing. So I'll end it there.
Those are all good things. If they come up in the next 2 minutes that we have before we're going to wrap up, let them come out, right? We could be spontaneous and let them come out. One of you mentioned earlier that there's some plans in the works for Bonded. Tyler, can you tell us what's in the works? What's coming next? Give people...
Yeah. So after this event in April, something I'm working with the folks at MenHealing around is the idea of taking Bonded into non-traditional theater spaces. So like prisons, educational spaces, health centers, etc. And really taking art and making it as accessible as possible, which I think is a really, really beautiful idea. But ultimately, getting it all in line to do an off-Broadway run here in New York, which will be very exciting and something I'm really looking forward to. I'm also a filmmaker, like I mentioned, so definitely like there's a little seed inside my head that I'll eventually later adapt it into something for screen, but which has its own accessibility that theater just can't have. But I wrote it as a play, and I'm very proud of the play version of it, and I want to do that first. So yeah, working with MenHealing and then partnering with them even to go into the off-Broadway run world. So yeah. And I would say to this, if anyone wants to follow along or anything, please, like I try to post as much as possible about things like this. So like my website is tylerisaacmartin.com. And then my Instagram handle is Tyler Isaac Martin. Isaac, no one knows how to spell it, and that's okay. It's ISAAC. And so, but yeah, you can find me anywhere, and I will update, or you can reach out. And
clicking is great. Yes. Jim, what is happening in April? We've talked about it a zillion times now. Tell people how they can get involved with what's happening.
Check the menhealing.org website. You'll find information about the event. We're doing it on April 27th. That's a Sunday. We'll be doing live in-person presentation of the stage reading. It'll be starting at 6:15 Mountain Time on that Sunday, and we'll follow the stage reading with a Q&A with a couple of the creative artists, and Tyler and Bellamy. One of our board members, Deborah Warner, will be moderating that, and it will be accessible by live stream for any of you who aren't physically in Utah. So we'll be able to have people watching simultaneously there. And then we'll see if beyond that, we'd hopefully continue our collaboration with Tyler to see if there's some other places around the country we can do some stage readings. When it gets to be off Broadway, we hope to be involved with audience talkbacks doing that. And we'll continue to see where we can make some bridges into the correctional facilities where our materials are now being uploaded, to see if there's a way to reach people in that setting as well.
That is fantastic. This has been a lot of fun. Been fun for me. Hopefully it was fun for you. Hopefully it's fun for people that are listening. I want to thank you both so much for spending your time recording this and being part of this really fun conversation. And Tyler, thank you for your work and all of the beauty and wonder and fun and messy and all of those words that we could go on and on and on and on and on forever about. But thank you both. And hopefully we'll see folks in April in Salt Lake City or online.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.